Where is our culture going today? Indeed, is it going anywhere at all? A recent article by the Chief Rabbi of Great Britain, Dr. Jonathan Sacks, put it like this. He said, when the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness, God was going with them and giving them instructions. He said it was rather like having a GPS system in a car, which says to you, you need to turn right in half a mile from now. And of course, that leaves you open to the possibility that you might actually turn left instead out of sheer cussedness. And if you do that, the system will then wait for a minute and say, wasn't what we had in mind, but now that you've done that, you're now going to have to do this and then that and then the other to get back on track. And Jonathan Sacks said, that's what it was like when the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness. God went with them, but said, well, I didn't have that turn in mind, and now you're going to have to do this and this and this. And maybe our culture is like that, with God somehow grieving along with us and giving us instructions and so on. But then Jonathan Sacks went on to say, there is another option, and it's not so attractive. There's a type of ant which, when it gets lost, is programmed to follow the ant in front. Now that normally works out all right, because somewhere out there, there's some little legged creature that knows where it's going. But sometimes the ants like that get themselves into a huge great circle where each one is following the ant in front all right, but they're all joined up again at the back going round and round and round, and they all die because they don't know how to get out of that pattern. And the question really is our culture like that? Are we just going round and round in circles and getting nowhere? And it's because of that that we find again and again that certain themes bubble up in popular consciousness, themes which actually have haunted the imagination of the human race from very early on. And if you look at ancient poetry, whether it's from Egypt or Greece or wherever, ancient Chinese philosophy, or if you go to quite other parts of the world and study cultures and the artifacts they make, again and again you find these four themes. And it's because I've been fascinated by those four themes for a long time, and I'm very interested by the way in which they play out in relation to the Christian tradition, that I began this book, Simply Christian, with a consideration of these four themes and of the puzzles that they leave for us. And then I develop the book as it goes on with an attempt at showing how the Christian story relates to and answers and develops these four themes. Briefly, the four themes go like this. The first is what we can call justice. Basically, we know that there is such a thing as getting it right, as something being fair, or, on the other hand, as something being got wrong, as something being unjust and unfair. You don't have to teach people that. A child in the school playground will say, that's not fair. And they will know precisely what it means and what it would take to put, whatever it's happened, to put that right. And so we are left with this thought that, yes, we all know that there is such a thing as justice, as getting it right, as fairness, and yet we're not very good at it. We have whole systems for it. When I lived in London, I lived down the street from the Houses of Parliament and from the head of the police and from the great centre of all the legal enterprises that go on. We had masses of justice institutes, if you like. And yet justice still slips through our fingers. You can't quite get your handle on it and make sure that it's all going to work as it should. And so there's a puzzle about that, a puzzle for us in our larger systems and a puzzle in our own lives, because though we want justice when we have been wronged, we don't always want to give justice when we have actually wronged someone else. So that's the first of the puzzles. And the second goes like this. There used to be a time, maybe 40 or 50 years ago, when those who were leading in our culture were saying that religion and spirituality and prayer and all that sort of thing was really something that at best was a concern for people in their private individual lives. And it wasn't actually something that they needed to worry about in public life or in real life or to get them going as genuine human beings. It was a kind of a private hobby for people who liked that sort of thing. But in the last 10 or 15 years, spirituality has been making a comeback. People are now actually hungry for spirituality. If you put on a lecture course saying, Introduction to Spirituality, a lot of people will come because people have started to realize that actually you can go as hard as you like in the pursuit of money, of sex, of fame, of happiness of all sorts. But actually there'll be an ache somewhere inside that says there's another bit of you that isn't being refreshed. There's another bit that needs to grow and develop to balance all these other bits. As a bishop, I go around doing, among many other things, confirmation services. And often the confirmation candidates are quite young, but sometimes there are young adults and sometimes older adults who come forward for confirmation, which takes a certain amount of guts, in my culture at least, to stand up and be counted. And I often say to them, what are you doing here? Why are you standing up in front of your family and friends? And they say, well, it's because a while back, maybe I came to a funeral or something, a book I read or something just triggered a question in me. And I've been on that quest because I've realized there's something deep that is missing in my life and I need to go in search of it. And then I came into this church and the people were surprisingly friendly and I actually found that there was something there that I needed. And what they're talking about is that spiritual quest. But spirituality too is a puzzle. Different people find different things help them at different times. I have known people who have been delighted to come into a church where people dance around in the aisles. And I've also known other people who have left the church because people have started doing that there. So spirituality isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It isn't, here's a neat formula and this will solve all your problems. And actually, the greatest saints who've gone more deeply into the life of prayer and spirituality than anyone else will come back and tell us that there are puzzles and, yes, pains and problems and difficulties there, which they have to wrestle with. And yet they say the quest draws us on. So there's justice and there's spirituality. But then as well, there is something which, again, you can't miss out there in popular culture and in here in our own hearts and lives and imaginations. And it's about relationships. We all know that we are made for one another, and yet we all know that relationships are remarkably difficult. I have just this afternoon come off the telephone to somebody who's had a relationship really fall apart, and there was a confrontation and angry words were spoken. And I've now spoken to both the people involved, and they're puzzled as to how that happened and what went wrong, and in particular, what, if anything, can we now do about it? And yet relationships aren't just something that you can say, oh well, easy come, easy go, I've been friends with this person and now I'm going to be friends with that person. We all know that there is such a thing as loyalty, as being true to a friendship, a relationship, to a marriage. And yet it is difficult, it's hard work. And many of the greatest novels and plays and poems end with relationships in tatters and in disaster. And even where a friendship or a marriage lasts a lifetime, it still has to face this puzzle. What happens when one of those partners or both of them die? Death hovers over the whole question. Is life just a sick joke? Is it all just a bit of meaningless nonsense? So we have justice, which poses some questions. We have spirituality, which is very attractive, and yet it's not as easy as it sounds. And we have relationships, which we all know we need, and yet we're all very puzzled about.